Welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I am Amarachi Ubani. The past week has been a very fruitful, eventful one, especially for Ukraine. Our soldiers believed to be from Russia have made their way into the Crimea region and are surrounding military bases there, even preventing Ukrainians from entering. Despite threats of sanctions in violation of the country's sovereignty, Russia insists its aim is to protect Russian interests in the region. In fact, President Vladimir Putin says a threat of sanctions will not change his government's position. The U.S. government has announced visa restrictions on Ukrainian and Russian officials who've played negative roles in the Ukrainian crisis. The UK is planning the same, and NATO is still considering what actions to take, but Russia remains unperturbed. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry that any sanctions introduced by the U.S. against Russia will have a boomerang effect, and has advised the U.S. from doing anything that will affect relations between both countries. The tensions have indeed escalated, especially as Russia intends to continue to stand its ground. And the tensions within Crimea reached a fever pitch over the weekend as supporters of both groups, pro-unity and pro-Russia, clashed in Sevastopol. The rally for pro-unity spoke against the upcoming referendum on the 16th of this month, which will decide whether the Black Sea Peninsula, currently part of Ukraine, but historically Russia, should rejoin Russia. Crimea, home of Russian Black Sea Fleet and the Ukrainian Navy, has a narrow ethnic Russian majority calling for Russian leadership. Other residents say they want to preserve Ukrainian unity. The country's 1992 constitution sees the Autonomous Republic of Crimea as part of Ukraine. At the rally on Sunday, Ukrainian Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenuk insists Ukraine will be unwilling to give up Crimea, citing the 1994 Budapest Memorandum that guaranteed Ukraine's territorial integrity. This is our land, he says. Our parents and grandparents spilled their blood for this land. We will not give up a single centimeter of Ukrainian land. Let Russia and the Russian president know this. Ukraine's cabinet met on Sunday as Russian forces tightened their grip on Crimea despite a U.S. warning to Moscow that annexing the southern Ukrainian region would close the door to diplomacy in a tense east-west standoff. President Vladimir Putin has said that Ukraine's new leader seized power in an unconstitutional armed coup and that Russia had the right to invade Ukraine to protect Russians living in the former Soviet Republic. Former Ukrainian boxing champion and now presidential candidate Vitali Klitschko said at a press conference in Donetsk that Ukraine must remain united and prevent separatists from splitting the country. The crisis has been described as the worst face-off with Moscow since the Cold War. The West believes Russia's occupation is a miscalculation in the long term.
Well, I believe it is a miscalculation by Russia. It is a well-rehearsed plan, that is obvious, to move militarily into the Crimea. But it has been decided on in a great rush. There are long-term consequences that I believe will unite the rest of Ukraine more against Russian influence in the future, and that will lead to the whole of Europe saying, well, we will have to make sure our energy supplies come from many other sources, and so that the long-term consequences for Russia have not been thought through in Moscow.
Meanwhile, a Ukrainian border patrol plane came under fire while flying at about 1,000 meters near the administrative border with Russian-occupied Crimea on Saturday. No one was hurt when gunmen opened fire on the unarmed aircraft. The Diamond Light aircraft was flying 3 crew on an observation mission. In a video shot from the Ukrainian plane and distributed by the Border Guard Services press office, white flashes, which appear to be shots, can be seen being directed at the plane as it flies away. Now, earlier I spoke to Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, Professor Bola Akinterinwa, on the nature of the crisis in Ukraine and all the state players. What do you make of the Ukrainian crisis?
Well, the Ukrainian crisis raises the fundamental question of the place of self-determination in international relations. Secondly, it points to the renewal of another Cold War, and more significantly, it reminds us of the fact that crisis, conflict, war cannot be ruled out in interpersonal relationships. The problem we now had was that with the disintegration of the Soviet Union, several millions of Russians were displaced. They now found themselves outside of Russia. The challenge, the wish, the foreign policy focus of Russia is to find a way of bringing these Russians together, bring them back home. Now in Ukraine, geopolitically speaking, eastern Ukraine, the main inhabitants there, they are Russians. They are Russians. And not just that, not that they are just Russian origin. No. They speak Russian. Their culture, their civilization, their lifestyle, basically Russian. And these Russians in eastern Ukraine want to be rejoined with Russia. Okay? They don't want to be part of Ukraine. Now, in western Ukraine, since the opening and restructuring of Soviet Union, they have been entertaining relationship with European Union. They want to be westernized. So, they prefer to be with the West. Russia's official policy stand is that, look, since the problem in Ukraine is internally driven, it's more of an internal divisions quarrel. Russia proposed to the Americans that the solution to the problem cannot be confrontation, but consultation at the levels of Russia and the Americans. So Russia is not in any way interested in having westernization at its immediate border. No. So this is why, for instance, I now talk about an emerging Cold War, in which case we are likely to have a situation whereby Russia will certainly give active support to Eastern Ukrainians, who are basically Russians. And when the West talks about abuse or violation of the sovereignty of Ukraine, that is good, that is beautiful, theoretically and on the paper. But the issue now is that, yes, the Westerners want to have a foothold and control Ukraine. Russia is